on my life and how God has been working in my life. The second part I would like to share with you is what God says to that question, and the third are the practical takeaways that I've been wrestling with recently. So, if you want to show, the next slide. So I started working for the RCMP in 2017. I worked as a dispatcher, 911 call taker, as my dad said. Pretty much what that meant is if you called 911 and you were in our area, I was one of the people that you were talking with, and we would send out the police to help you. In addition to that as well, we were also talking with police officers on the road. So if you got pulled over and you're wondering why they haven't come out of their police vehicle and up to your vehicle right away, and you're just sitting in that anticipation, that's because usually they run the license plate and they're running it with us, so they can keep their eyes on you. Generally, is what they're supposed to do. They give us the license plate. We run it. We tell them who the vehicle is registered to, what their driving record is like, and if they have any concerns that they should be aware of before they approach the vehicle. So this is a picture of me doing that. This is actually in Surrey. So I worked in Courtenay, got hired in 2017, worked there for a couple of years, and moved in 2019. I loved the job, but I wanted to do bigger and better things. I was like, well, the city is bigger, there's more things to do there. Why don't I go to Surrey, which is headquarters for all of British Columbia. That means we do the exact same job, but we get extra responsibilities. So anyone that needed the bomb squad to come out for explosives, if you needed any specialty units, we were responsible for them, along with like if the Prime Minister is moving around or is in Vancouver, any of the Secret Service stuff, any of the consulates, we're responsible to monitor all of those and their alarms. So it was super cool. If you look here, you can see that's me. There's like 3 different screens we're monitoring, and then I have a headset on. We have like radios that will speak out of the behind the screens as well, and then people could be talking. So we have so many different sort of avenues of information we're taking at the same time, while having to be aware of what's happening in the room and in our area, so that we can all work really well together. So I've been doing this now for just over 7 years. This is the job I've been doing, and I've really enjoyed it. But then I just felt like there was more. I wanted to do something else. I didn't want to sit behind a desk for the rest of my life. And one of my coworkers, her husband got hired with fire and said, you know what, you should go join fire. You can still help people, it's great pay, everybody loves firefighters, so why don't you look into that? And so I thought to myself, why not? And so during my work, I was able to also, on the side, do a lot of the training to slowly get all my certifications. Unlike the police, where we got paid to get all of our training done, fire, you have to do all your training by yourself, and then you still have to try and apply for a job. So the next slide here, I believe you posted up here. This is in Texas. I went to Texas to do my fire training. That was all the formal skills training. This is just some of the people I was with. We had a crew of like 27 people, and a lot of them were Canadians. I think only 4 were from Texas, but the rest were all from Canada. And that's us on one of our burn days, learning about the dynamics of fire and how hot it is. And it's very hot, especially when you're very insulated. So yeah, I've been doing all of my training for fire, got all the training in December, and early this year I was able to get my vehicle training that I needed as well. So I was ready. I was ready to get hired as a firefighter. I felt peace going into it. I felt peace that God was blessing that way, making it possible for me to go there. And I had to take some time off, and I was able to do that with my work. So I was just so excited and ready to get hired as a firefighter. In addition to that, because of COVID, there was a bit of a backlog. So a lot of people hadn't been trained during COVID, and so that left a bit of a vacuum. So departments were hiring a lot more than they typically do. So a process that is generally very competitive was maybe a little bit less competitive because they were needing to hire firefighters. So I probably applied to every detachment in Vancouver that was hiring at the time, and every month or so there would be a new posting for like City of Langley, City of Burnaby, City of Coquitlam. And I was certain that one of these were going to turn out. And so different departments, I think Vancouver was my first pick, or Burnaby was my first pick. And Burnaby was my first pick because they had, from what I heard from other firefighters, the highest physical standard. So if you wanted to be a firefighter and you told everyone you worked in Burnaby, you were kind of the best firefighter in the Lower Mainland. So I thought I want to work for Burnaby. The other one that was really good was Vancouver. And the reason was those two both have switched from 2 days, 2 nights, which are 12-hour shifts, which is what I was doing for the police, to 24-hour shifts. So if you do the math, you only really have to go to work 72 days a year, which would be great. You work like a 24-hour shift, take 24 hours off, do another 24 on, and then you get 4 days off. So that was what I wanted. Burnaby would be great. I didn't get into Burnaby because I didn't have the driving that I needed yet. I didn't have my class 3. And Vancouver, I got an interview, so I was like, oh, this is great. And I got to write an assessment, which is like the next, sorry, I didn't get an interview. I applied, and then I was able to go to the next stage, which is to do a written assessment. And then after that, I got to an interview. And then after that, I didn't get any further, unfortunately. And so many of the departments have this rigorous process, and at each step, they cut people out. And so I was really disappointed I didn't get into Vancouver, because that was my second best choice. I applied for New West and made it to the assessment point, and this was the first time I went to assessment to see how many people were also applying. For Vancouver, they had multiple days, so I was sitting in a room with 30 people. And for New West, which is a lot smaller, if you know your geography in Vancouver, it's a lot smaller of an area. They only, I think, have 3 halls as opposed to the 8 or 10 that Vancouver has. And I went in for their assessment, which is a 3-hour-long multiple choice and a bunch of different pamphlets you have to fill out. And I was competing with over like 200 people in the room. Everyone's all dressed to the nines, all competing for the position. Needless to say, I didn't get hired with US either. And finally, Surrey, which is where I was working, and I didn't really want to work in Surrey, but they were hiring as well. And so I applied, and I built their assessment, and then their assessment, in addition to their assessment, they had a mental assessment as well, and you had to take, and it was like $300, and you don't get your money back if you don't get it through. So that cost $300 for that. So that was a big payment that I had to invest into this. So I thought, well, I prayed about it. I was like, well, if it's $300 and I get a career out of it, it's worth it. So I put the $300 down and thought, well, God, this is probably the one then, since everything else is closed, and now I'm having to really see how much I want this. And so made it through the assessment. Instead of doing their interview next, they did their physical test, which was super hard. But I did the physical test, and I passed, which was awesome. It was probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in that short period of time. One of the elimination rounds is basically a huge obstacle course, and each of the stations you're doing something, you don't really get a break. So the one that's the hardest, and I thought I would be okay at, but was way harder than I expected, was you're wearing a 45-pound weighted vest, and there is, I think it's like 8 flights of stairs, and then you have to carry an 80-pound hose pack. There's a bunch of hoses that are all tied up to simulate if you had to go to the top of a tower. So you have to do that, and you have to do it, I think, twice in under 3 minutes. You're doing like 16 flights of stairs one way, and you have to do it under this time. And so because you've already done so many other obstacles, when you get to that point, this is like the make or break, and the assessment person I was with, who was assigned to me, said, usually it's this that people fail at. So he said, you're doing okay, you're doing good, if you can do it. And so I got up halfway through, and he's like, okay, that's a minute and a half. And I was like, wow, I cannot slow down, because if I hit it right at the same pace, I'm going to be right at 3 minutes, and I can get cut. So if you fail one part of the assessment, you're out, and that's the end of that. So I just hustled and just gave it everything I got, and luckily I finished in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and I was able to pass the rest of them as well. So I got through that, and I was like, okay, this is probably the one, God. After that, I got invited to the next stage, so I didn't get cut at the physical. I got invited to the next stage, which was the skills assessment day, and so there's testing on different skills, see how you take instructions. And unfortunately, I didn't pass that one, so I got cut. And this was after months and months of applying and putting myself out there and trying to just trust that God knew what He was doing. So I remember really vividly, I got the email, we're disappointed, we're not gonna continue with your application, thanks for your time. And we're just like standing in the shower and just thinking like, man, this is so hard. And I was so disappointed, and I was wondering like, God, what are you doing? Like, this is something that I felt at peace about, that you were blessing. I have like so many people praying for me. I have my whole church in Vancouver praying for me. They're like, oh, we see you, you're going to do this, you're going to be a firefighter, it's going to be great, praying into that. And so I was so certain I was going to get hired as a firefighter, and I wasn't. My dreams were kind of all coming to a close. And I just remember wrestling with that. And then I remember really vividly just speaking, not out loud, but just in my head, I was like, I just need to be a firefighter. And when those words kind of all came out in my head and I was able to almost see them, God really challenged that. And he's like, well, why? And I was like, well, I've told so many people I was going to do it. I've invested so much money into it. So many people have been praying for me to do this. And I just thought you were going to give this to me. I've done all the right things. I've done everything I thought I needed to do to get this, but you still haven't given this to me. And God just really challenged me and really convicted my heart on this. And just, the question that he had for me was like, why do you need to be a firefighter? And the only truthful response I could give him was that I believed I deserved it and I wanted it. And then he just questioned that and said, well, your identity, like why is your identity so tied up in being a firefighter? And he asked me, like, isn't being a son of God, isn't that enough? Shouldn't your identity be in that? And do you need more than that? And I just had to throw up my hands and say, God, you're right. Like my identity is in you, and it being in you is enough. And if I'm thinking I need anything else more in addition to that, that's on me, and that's not what you said is true. And so I remember standing, super long shower, by the way, standing in the shower still, and after sort of this realization, coming to this place of understanding that I had put so much more of my identity in this than I should have, he challenged me a step further. And so God asked me, well, now we're kind of like in this space of you taking account for your life. What other areas do you have that you're putting your identity in that you might not be aware of? And so I remember thinking to myself, I was like, well, not really anything else. And then God really graciously showed me another area. And he said, well, your job. What if I took your job? Would you still be okay? Would you still trust me? And I thought to myself, I was like, yeah, obviously. But that wouldn't be a hard choice. And then as I reflected more on that later that evening and over time, it became more apparent that jobs are good and financial stability is good, and that's like a blessing from God. But I had put way more into that than I had realized, where I liked my job. It gave me the financial freedom to buy a lot of unnecessary things on Facebook Marketplace. And it's given me an opportunity to like say I had this job, and most people would be like, oh, that's a great job. You're paying into a pension. That's great. And it kind of gave me like this sort of identity and that status and that freedom. And so this is the framework for God really challenging me to trust him and really coming to a head with, do I believe that God is enough? Is he enough for me? And can I put my full trust into him? So I just want to transition now. That's sort of the backstory of this message. And the second part, which is what we're going to show up next here, is God enough? And what does God say to that? Is he enough? And so to do this, I just want to do an activity with you guys. So just for a moment here, if you will indulge me, imagine that tonight you were to die, okay? So imagine tonight you were to die, and I just want you to think, and you don't have to say this out loud, but I just want you to think, if you were to die tonight, how certain would you be that you would go to heaven? And so there's a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely not certain at all, you don't think you're going there, and 10 being absolutely certain. And I remember hearing this question a couple years ago, so just think about the number for you, whatever that is. And as a Christian, I thought to myself, well, I'm probably like an 8, 8.5. Like, I'm not like the best person, but I know I'm better than some of my friends. I know that God saved me, but he probably didn't have to save me from like that much. Like, I'm probably better than some other people. Like, I'm helping God out in these different areas. And what's really convicting about this realization and what the pastor was saying when I heard this the first time was, if you're a Christian and your certainty that you're going to go to heaven is anything below a 10, then your theology is really mixed up, and you got something a little bit out of whack. And that was really convicting to me, because like I've been a Christian all my life, and I thought like I know all the answers, I know all the Christian answers, I've got my stuff straight. But it was really convicting for me, because what it helped me to realize is that I thought my salvation, I played a part in earning that, or being able to achieve that. And that just wasn't true. And so I just wanted to transition into talking about some of the things that God says about himself and about who he is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a verse, if you want to post the verse there, Ellie. So in Deuteronomy And this is in response to the questions I've had and whether I could fully trust God. I've been with my finances as well, with my job, and just with anything and everything. So in Deuteronomy, it reads, "Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you." And this is the part that really stands out. "He will not leave you or forsake you." And there's another verse as well, I don't have it on here, but in Hebrews, so this is Deuteronomy, Old Testament, Hebrews, New Testament. "Keep your life free from love of money and be content for what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you." And I just had to learn that this is a promise from God, that he will never leave you nor forsake you. In addition to that, it's a promise like a rock. And if you are you're in the river and you're trying to hold on to something, the river of life, and it's just rushing, and there's a rock. The rock is like the promise that God's given us. It's true and it's there. And it doesn't change whether you grab it and you believe it or not. It's true or it's not. And in this case, that's what Jesus said. He says, "I will never leave you or forsake you." So if that's true, it's true regardless if we hold on to it or not. Okay, just moving on here. And I find that's easier said than done. Parents have always told us growing up, trust God. Trust God, pray to God, trust Him with all your heart, trust Him. And it's way easier to do that when things are going well. And when things are not going well, it's a lot more challenging. And luckily, the Bible does speak to that as well. So in Philippians, we read, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And that's verse 6. Bumping down to 11, this is the part that I think is super applicable for me, especially when I'm worrying about things, and how applicable it is to still hold on to that promise when we have reasons not to. Verse 11, it says, not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. So, I want to transition to the last part here, which is some of the practical takeaways in light of those truths. This truth that He will never leave us nor forsake us, and the truth that even when things are hard, even in wealth or not, in health or not, we can still hold on to those things. So, in the last part here, one of the things I had to wrestle with was in trusting God. It wasn't all about trusting Him when I wasn't anxious and when I wasn't worried. It was mostly actually trusting Him when I was anxious and when I was worried. And so, some of you might know this, but I now live back here. I moved here in July, and I trusted God. He sort of closed a bunch of doors. He closed all the fire jobs I wanted to apply for in the mainland, and closed some of my living situations. I was renting from my uncle and aunt, and they had to rent out their whole house. So I was looking for a place to stay in Langley or somewhere in the lower mainland. It was super expensive. And I also really wasn't feeling at peace working in the job I was doing. And so I was waiting for God to open a door, and He didn't. And I wanted to practice just that trust in Him, because He had never given me a reason to not trust Him my whole life. He'd always come through for me. Not always in the way I wanted to, but I never was left lacking. And so I had to really put my trust in God and be like, well, You haven't given me a reason not to, and I'm wanting to trust in You more, and I should trust in You with my financial stability. And so I'm going to take this step. I'm going to move home because I have an opportunity somewhere to live. And He blessed me with photography, so I'm going to continue to work in that. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, I'm not trusting in myself and my skills anymore. I want to trust that You're going to continue to provide for me. And so I moved home and continued to trust Him. I thought, you know what, now that God, I'm going to give You these areas that I hadn't really trusted You in, it's going to be a little bit smoother. And it's not, actually. It's probably being less smooth. But He's continued to provide for me over and over again, even just with people forgetting to have paid me. And I forgot they hadn't paid me either. And they're like, hey, we still haven't paid you for this job. And I was like, that's great, because I really need that. And so He's continued to provide for me, but He has really been stretching my faith by having me trust in Him each and every day for really everything. So the last part here that I want to share in closing here is this story. And this is a story I've heard from another pastor. And the story is, there's this man. and he is sitting on this fence. And on one side of the fence is God, and on the other side of the fence is the devil. And this man looks to God, and God says, come here. I have promises for you. My son has purchased your freedom, and I have these promises for you. Come to this side. And the man's like, well, I'm not too sure. Like, I like what you're selling here. It sounds like it's a pretty good deal, but giving up everything and fully trusting you and a life where there will be trials and tribulations, not sure if I'm totally sold on that. Let me see what the other guy has to offer. And so he turns to the other side, which is the devil's side, and he looks at him, and he says, well, aren't you going to try and get me to come to your side? And the devil says, I don't have to. The fence is mine. And so I remember thinking about that. Let that sink in for a bit, that it's not just that we are trying to choose between like God and the devil and worry and peace, but it is even in not choosing, we're not choosing God, you know? And so one of the verses that really helps sink this in for me is Romans 8, 6-7. And Paul's saying, for to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. And so for me, that's just a reminder that if I'm living and trying to win my own salvation, if I'm living in such a way to help God out with my salvation, make it easier for Him, then I'm not trusting Him. And I'm going to be partnering with that worry, partnering with just living in my flesh. And that is not just an attempt to not please God. We can't please God from that position. It's an all or nothing. And so my challenge for you, in the same way as a challenge for me, is are we partnering with peace or are we partnering with worry? And are we putting our full trust in God? Because He's given us these promises. They're there for us. And we can stand on them, we can hold on to them, regardless of the crazy river of life. But the thing is, regardless if you hold on to them, regardless of if you believe in them, they are there, they're bought for you already. You know, like these are there regardless of if you believe them or not. These are there for us. And so I just challenge you in the same way I've challenged myself to want more of what God has for us, to want more of what He was willing to do through us. But we've got to step away from trying to win our own salvation or trying to manage the parts that we think we need to and just go all in with God. So in closing, to answer the question, is God enough? Yes. He said that He would never leave us nor forsake us. He has said that to the people in the Old Testament. He said that in the New Testament. It's stood the test of time, you know. And so I just encourage you to hold on to that promise. And I just want to pray with us before we transition into the next song that Mary's prepared for us to kind of combine and close this up. But if you would just bow your heads with me, I would just love to pray with you all. Father, I just thank you for this time, this opportunity to share what you have been doing in my life, Lord. And I just thank you that you love me, you love all of us, Lord, and that you